Hello, it's Spence, the evil genius, with your WordPress tip of the day. All right, guys, you know what? I want to wrap up our custom content or custom post type lessons here with a follow-up about CSS styling. Now, our inspiration for this lesson, Geek Girl, has followed up with her final question during this whole course, which is now that she's got a sample page set up and she's used most of the tips that we've given her in the first 3 lessons, now she needs a little help kind of wrapping it up. She says she still has a problem with the responsive CSS of her boxes when the width is under 980 pixels on both pages. And she's given 2 sample pages here. And basically, she's got a problem with 2 things. One is that the responsiveness, and she's also got an overlap issue. So I've opened up the first page here, and she's done a nice job. She's got our responsive slider, our custom content, single area. She's got some individual horizontal areas. And then here's where the problem is. And to show you this more clearly, I'm going to use one of my favorite tools that's in our 1WD toolkit for freelance web designers. This is a free tool called the Resizer, and it's basically a bookmarklet that when you click on it, it gives us this nice palette at the top so we can see what happens when we switch from full width to, let's say, an iPad. And if you scroll down here, you can see what's going on. Well, let me give it to you a better way. Let's say if we go back to laptop size, you see how she's got the yellow and blue boxes. And then when we go to iPad size, oops, they're gone. So let's take a look at what's happening, because I'm going to teach you 3 different properties for CSS today that you're going to use for fixing responsive design elements. And the issue really comes down to the fact that when you're using responsive design in this child theme, remember that we've not only got to account for the main full-size page, but we also have to account for what happens with the various elements when we go to a smaller media size. In other words, the browser is 768 pixels wide instead of, let's say, 1280 or bigger. Now, the first one we're going to talk about is over here, and I'm using this by way as a reference. This is in our resource library as well. It's a free online resource called w3schools.com, and you click on CSS. You've got a nice library here of just about everything that you might be interested in. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the display property. And there's many different display properties we've used before. I'd say 4 of them are the biggest ones that you're going to use quite often. And let me scroll down here. Actually, let me go back here. 1 page. The 4 that I use most often are going to be inline block, or none, which we've used before in one of our tutorials about how to hide menu items. Now, in layman's terms, inline is something that you're going to change, that you're declaring an attribute that really doesn't give dimensionality to the particular element. For example, let's say you want to change the color of a span of text, or you want to say that its opacity is different, or that its, I don't know, font style is different. There's no actual substance to it. Height, width, padding, things like that. Whereas with block, just like the name sounds, it's kind of, think of Lego blocks. It's got a height, a width, a size, a dimensionality, a layer, if you will. Now, these can be used interchangeably with a hybrid called inline block. I often use that when I'm, let's say, making footer type items. Let's say I'm putting links to social media, and I want to make an unordered list. For each list item, I would want to have, let's say, them horizontally across the bottom of the page. Well, if I make an unordered list and I give each of them a block, it's going to be really tricky, because they're not going to want to be nice and sit side by side. They all want to take up their own space on the page and will tend to push the next one down to the next line. So if I use the inline block hybrid, it gives me the ability to say each one of you guys is 20 pixels high and 20 pixels wide, and you have a right margin of 5 pixels, but I want you all to line up nicely along the bottom of the page. And finally, of course, the none is something we've used when you are using conditional statements that say, is this a logged in user? If so, then this particular element do not display, by saying display none, right? Let's say we had a sign-in box. If the person's already logged in, we don't want that to display. We can do this with CSS by using display none. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, please go back and review some of our customization tutorials in the LabZip custom course. Okay. And now let's talk about how we're going to use that here. When we're using a responsive layout like this, the first thing we have to do is give some substance, some body to these background areas, because as you can see, otherwise they just cower down. They hunker down in the corner. They're afraid to be shown because all that other content's pushing them out of the way like a bully. So how are we going to fix it? Well, I'm going to use one of the new editors here. I'm sorry, new editing tools here. You know how much I love Firebug, but I'm now kind of enjoying the fact that in the latest version of Firefox, there's the built-in editing tool, which is kind of nice. So let's use it here. I'll show you it. And if you like the old Firebug, please use that as well. So we're going to use inspect element and trigger the editor. It's got a nice little groovy. I like it mostly because it has this ability for all of the styles and the rules to be on the right side, which works really well with the video. And in this particular mode, I don't have the full editing window below open because it's nice for you guys to see it. But so what I can do here is I can go and select with my mouse by clicking on the little selector tool. And when I find what I'm looking for, like right here, I'll work on it. Let's make it more obvious though. Let's go this way and I'm going to select it here. Okay, you see when I scroll my mouse over, it's kind of nice. It just literally grabs onto that. So let's do over here. She's got notice is left. The division ID notice is left. Okay, and I can see here on the right side, the rule is notice is left and notice is right bottom, which makes sense because we got notice is left and we got the other one over here, notice is right bottom. And she's got the background color, but she's got no body, right? She's got no display for the body. So we're going to set the property for display. So now I got to go select it again. Let's do it here. We're going to click and add a little space, a new line. We're going to just click in or type display colon. And now we're going to use yes. What are we going to use? Block. And we're going to hit enter. And the reason we're using block and not inline block is because we don't need these to line up together. These are items that are standing alone. They already have their own width defined. You can see here, let's show you that. When you select this item, you can see it's got the grid column 420. And we see here grid column 420 already has a predefined width. So here we're really just sort of interested in saying, hey, stand up for yourself to live up to your full width of 44%. We don't need to tell it how wide it to be, or we don't need to tell it to stand in line with other items. We just say be yourself, but don't collapse. Be a block. That's my new word, be a block. Now let's see what happens. If we click on the pad, you can see now, hey, that worked pretty nice, right? So we fixed it for that one. Now we're going to have to fix that also for the other one, the yellow. Okay, so let's go back to width, and we're going to select the other one, which is the reciprocal. And we got the same thing. We click there. We're going to add in display, enter, block, and now we check it. Okay, now we're making progress. Now we got some other issues to deal with. First of all is it's spitting out the images at the bottom because the overflow problem. We've also got an issue that they're not the full width. These should be the full width, right? So I'm going to do a little cheat sheet here. Since we're working on her site, I'm going to save this CSS over here, my little text editor. All I'm going to do is, like usual, I'm going to copy the rule. Okay, that's the right and the bottom. And let's do the other one, which is the left and the bottom. Copy rule. Paste that. So I got two rules here, and we'll come back to this. Okay, now let's deal with the fact that these aren't full width. Well, remember we just said how these are already defined with the class of column 420 over here, right? We can see column 420 width. All right, so this is where you get into what's called a media query. If we're to look at the CSS, there are different size widths for the browser that are declared, and each of them have different CSS that can apply to it. And this kind of makes sense if you think about it. You could define responsive CSS by starting with the smallest possible browser size and working your way upwards, which is a popular trend, or you can work from the largest screen size and go downwards, which was previously the most popular, and I still do this myself. It really depends on the project. But the idea is that you declare breakpoints. And in my case, I like to work with the common hardware breakpoints. So I do typically 1024, 960, 768, 480, and 320. And those various sizes we can actually set up here if we wanted to, or we could just customize them in. And the reason those are common is because if you think about it, the iPad is 1024. The iPad in landscape mode is 768. Even the iPad mini is that way. You've got the iPhone is 480 in landscape, and it's 320 in portrait. Now, if you're into designing for Android and all kinds of other stuff, that's cool too. But you know, everybody who followed after Apple kind of went along with the idea that they will respect most of those dimensionality rules. And if you have some page that's set up for a breakpoint of 768 or 480, it tends to be that the Android and the later Windows phones will respond appropriately to it. So you can design as you wish, but this is just the concept of what we're talking about. Now, when you're doing media queries, let's look and see what one of those looks like. So if we're going to go in here, let's use our inspect tool again. Oops, let's do, turn on the style box. Now, typically, and this is more than I intend to do for this tutorial, typically when you're doing media query CSS, you're going to put this at the very end of your style sheet. Because if you put it earlier, it again tends to be written first, and then the last thing on the style sheet is respected last. So if you think about it, the default, let's say when you're designing full page, will come first, and each of the smaller size browser changes, the specific ones for smaller style browsers, will come later in your style sheet. Now let's just go over to our demo site. So labsecrets.com, demo, responsive. Okay. I'll show it to you over here because it's easy, and that way we'll just kind of work from there. So I'm going to inspect this, and let's go ahead and open up the view the source here. And I'm going to show you the style sheet that's right over here, which is there we go. Okay, so we're going to look for the child theme CSS. Okay, let me scale this. Sorry, I had to dig around in there for a second. Okay, so you'll notice what's happening is this has various styles, and as I scroll down, we've got what are called media queries. And media queries are set up just like other CSS, except that you can imagine like a giant container, a Tupperware container, holds the CSS that is unique for each screen size. So here, for example, we've got at media. That's the media query. And then we're saying this applies to screens. And then you got to use the syntax with this ellipses. Max width. That means max width of the screen size is 980 pixels. So what this says is that I want to apply the CSS below here for any time that the screen size is up to a maximum width of 980 pixels. And then see this bracket here that starts it and this bracket here that ends it? That's the Tupperware container. Everything inside of that Tupperware container is the CSS that will apply if I'm looking at a screen size that has a maximum width of up to 980 pixels. And just to prove, you know, if we scroll down, then's the next one, smaller. This is a media query if the screen size has a max width of 650 pixels, and so on and so forth. 480 pixels, 320 pixels, etc. Now, you can even do some other unusual stuff, but just sticking with this one, we need a media query that's going to have added the particular element and attribute we want for when the screen size gets to a certain width. In the case of Geek Girl, she says she's having a problem because at 980 it's breaking. Well, we're going to say then we need to add a special display as block when the actual width of the browser is up to a maximum width of 980. Now you got to play with this, of course, because this is a very handy design element, but the reason that this is really important is not so much for the block. We can apply the block even if it's on the full width of the page. You can see right here, it seems to make no difference at all, right? I mean, it's going to stay looking nice as a block whether the page is 980 or 320 or anything else. The problem is that when we got to the narrow width, we want this to be also 100% wide. Okay, so let's copy what we're going to need And then what's interesting is we're going to have to apply this sort of in a weird way because I don't have access to her CSS. So I'm just going to show it to you. You're going to have to trust that it works. So what we're going to end up doing is, let's say we're over here and our, let's turn this off. There we go. So our size is a 600 tab. Let's go to iPad. It's 768. So we want when the media screen size is 768. Actually, we can even go up to 980. Let's see what happens. We go to 800. It's still broken. Let's put in a custom width here of 980 and see what happens. Okay, see, it's still broken at 980. So I'm wondering when this actually breaks. This probably breaks at 1024. What's 1024? Okay, so it works at 1024. So apparently with her design, it's breaking probably somewhere less than 1024. Oh, actually what I can do here is I can just drag this and it would tell me, but I'm trying to show you guys the number. So let's try even less. Let's try 990. No, it still works. 981. Still working. So it must be breaking right there at 980. Yep. Okay, it breaks right at 980. So we're going to say media query, max width, 980. And what we need to do is now say, at this stage, what do we do about these boxes? Well, I suggest we make them 100% wide. Okay, so when we select it, remember we had at the beginning of the tutorial, the class of column 420 has a width of 44%. Let's see what happens when we crank that up to 95%. Not bad. I think we can go even more. Let's go maybe 98%. And what I'm looking at is to make sure that I got a kind of comparable right and left margin. And I do. And that actually works pretty well because now I've got a situation where they're staying as blocks and yet they're filling up the screen nicely, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this rule. Let's go back over to my working editing sheet here. And we're going to merge these two concepts together. So now I'm going to paste this in. But remember, I don't want this to happen unless we are at a media query where the screen width is up to 980 pixels. After that, I don't want them to be 100% width. I want them to be the original 44% and change, right? So let's go over to our source. We're going to copy exactly the beginning of this. And we're going to merge this together with what we just did. Okay, and now remember what I want to do is I want to put an end bracket on my Tupperware container. So remember, I've got my Tupperware container goes from the top all the way down to the bottom. Okay, and the reason this is really critical is if you forget that last bracket, you're going to leave yourself in a whole heap of trouble because it's going to affect what's below it. So what I often do is I'll put a note and I'll say end media query for 980. Okay, put it inside of comments. Let me crank this up a little too so you can see this a little better. There we go. All right, so now what we've got is a media query. It's going to be at the end of our other custom CSS, right? Because we want the other full-size stuff to change first, and then we want the other things here to change second. Now, since we've done it this way, we don't need to duplicate having the top and the bottom be the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this out and we're going to put it in here. And now we've got a situation where we've merged the two concepts. We've got basically our Tupperware container that's a media query for a screen width up to 980, holding all of the CSS here, and then it has a little comment at the end that says it ends. And this will affect the notices left, notices right, and it will basically make them into display blocks. Now the one thing though that I want to make sure of is I add that last particular 420 class. So remember, we're going to take this again, we're going to copy the rule, we're going to also put that in here. And notice I did not get rid of that last closing bracket for the Tupperware container, as I call it. So now we've got a media query that will basically solve the problem for Geek Girl and give her a format that will work nicely. And let's test this. So if we go over here, we've got our full screen. Let's get rid of this displaying the style. So, one of the things we need to do is we need to remember that unfortunately when I'm doing it without actually saving it to the CSS, when I apply that 420, I'm not affecting the media query, I'm just sort of affecting it in here. So let's reload this. And what I can do is actually, I can go into, well, I can't do it because I don't have the demo. Let me see if I still have it. Maybe I do. Lab Playground. If I do, we're in luck. Let's see. Well, I kind of do. So I'm going to apply this and basically see if we have the same results here as we do on the Geek Girl side, right? So let me log in here. And I'm going to see if I can just pop this in real fast using the built-in editor. Now, when I'm doing it here, I'm putting it in LabZip Custom because I know, for me, this is where all my additions are. And this is generally where we want you to put them when you're using the responsive LabZip child theme, because it's designed to be the most superior to all the other style sheets. It has the most priority. I'm not sure if this is going to work because I hadn't tested this before, but let's see if we get lucky. Okay, so if I use my resizer, and it looks like it works nicely. I don't have the same styling as she does because I don't have the colored backgrounds, but you see what's happening? At widescreen of 1280, it's fine. At iPad, it's fine. It's going to 100% width. See that? 50-50. Let me go even smaller, and it's working, and it's working, and all is good with the world. Now, I'm glad you guys got to sort of see me live, because one of the ways I like to teach is to show you that this is a fun experiment, right? This is not something that you need to be afraid of. It's not something that even I know every single time pre-prepared. I oftentimes have to muddle around. But the nice thing is the tools you need are right here, so I'm showing you exactly what you can do. And if you follow this step by step, I think you're going to get that these Lego blocks will fit together a certain way. Now, I started also here at the w3schools.com. I want you to not only look at the display property, but there's another one that sometimes comes into play called Overflow. And I just want to leave you with this one. And oftentimes when you're using a background, particularly a colored background, if something is a block, the background might not work too well. In other words, we're talking about how on that smaller size that the background was spitting out the image at the bottom. Now, this is something that we oftentimes find, I think the two that I use most often are going to be visible and hidden. So we've got basically overflow visible, overflow hidden. Overflow hidden is, in a weird way, the opposite result that you sometimes expect. So let me go back over to her example side and show you. If we go over here, let's refresh this, make sure we're back to where we were. Let's just see what happens when we change the display property on this. So I'm going to say inspect element, and we're going to select, let's say, this box here. Okay. Overflow hidden. Nothing. Okay, let me change it to a smaller size. There we go. Okay, so inspect. Well, in this case, actually, it's funny because there we go. Okay, that's what I was looking for. Okay, so basically, we're not going to use this particular setup, but I did want to show you how this works. If we have the box without the overflow hidden, what happens is that the yellow box, the notices division, says, hey, I got a size, I'm strong, I'm all by myself. But then what it allows to have happen is it allows the stuff inside of it to kind of fall out of it, sort of dribble out the bottom, like this image. So when we use the display block, oftentimes we also have to add an overflow and say hidden. And ironically, even though the CSS schools say that this hidden will cause the rest of the content to be invisible and the overflow to be clipped, in my experience, it's the opposite. What will happen is this, is that when you say overflow hidden on a block that has been displayed, that it will really just, the block takes over and says, hey, You're inside of my space. I'm going to adopt you as my own, and I'm going to leave you inside of me, and everything is going to look nice and attractive. And I know this is sort of funny, but it's just a minor point. If you have a case where you apply display block and something is dribbling out the bottom, okay, like that, try adding overflow hidden, and you might be surprised, like we see here, it fixes the problem. Okay, so this has been a little bit more of a loosey-goosey lesson, but again, I love when the people who are our members, our very loyal members over at 1WDTV, come up with these great questions, because these are practical solutions for them working with clients. And I encourage you to also sort of think out of the box here, and don't be afraid to use all the tools that I've displayed for you here and in all the rest of our lessons. If you have any questions, you can also come to 1WDTV and reach me over there in the forums if you're a member, or you can click on support and send me a question there if you're not. So until then, this is Spence, the evil genius, and I'll see you next time.